Pastor Tim coming to you from Bend and Lomita United Methodist Churches in Central Texas, keeping the faith in rural Texas. We have been talking about the Bible and the stories of the Bible. Last time we talked about Moses and how he began. Now it's time to turn his direction back towards Egypt. He is out in the wilderness tending his flock, and he sees a bush burning. But it is not consumed. The flame is just around the bush. Now, apparently, that was not an unusual event in the wilderness of the Middle East, but to have it not be consumed was. And fire and smoke and light were symbols of God's presence. So he knew something was going on. And then God spoke, and so he took his shoes off because he knew he was on holy ground. It reminds us that holy ground can be anywhere where God is and we are. And so God spoke to him and said, I have heard the cries of my slaves in Egypt. They have been slaves there for hundreds of years, and they need to be set free. So I'm going to do something about it, and what I'm going to do is you. That's what God seems to do most of the time. He doesn't send a miracle. He doesn't send an army of angels. He sends people. He expects people to do what God is asking done, just like he does expect for us. But Moses said, no, I'm not the person to send. I've got all kinds of things wrong with me. I don't speak well. I don't do things well. I don't have anything to tell them. And God says, I'll send somebody with you to help take care of that. You're the man. And he says, how am I going to get them to believe me? Who are they going to say that was sent, when I say who sent me? And guess what God said? I am sent you. I am who I am. And that is a basic statement about who God is. God is existence. God doesn't have to have a name. God is existence itself, and that should persuade people. And Moses then agrees to go. But now he's got a problem because he's got to talk to the Pharaoh and hope that Pharaoh doesn't remember him because he was a prince in Egypt. And either the Pharaoh changed or the old Pharaoh didn't remember from 40 years before, and in 40 years he'd changed in appearance quite a bit. But so Moses went down to speak for God, and the first things he does is try to persuade him that he has the power of God. He takes a staff and he throws it down on the ground and it becomes a snake. And so the Egyptian magician said, well, we can do that. So he throws the staff on the ground and it becomes a snake, but the Moses snake eats the Egyptian snake, but they're not convinced. They're both, the Pharaoh is sure that it's all magic going around. And so Pharaoh has to be convinced by some other signs. And so there's a series of plagues that God sends upon Egypt. Now, this is not one day right after another. This takes months and months and months. And this is probably a good thing because during that time, Moses has got to win the trust of the Hebrew people. They're not going to follow somebody just because he says he's from God. Now, the interesting things are the plagues of Egypt all correspond with different gods that they had. So it's a sign that the God of Egypt, of the Hebrews, the one true God, was stronger than the Egyptian gods. The Egyptian God did not have any power compared to Yahweh. And so finally they are still unconvinced, and so Moses tells him that the firstborn will die. And again, they don't believe him, but the angel of death is coming. And so Moses tells the Hebrew people to take a lamb and to slaughter it, and have a Passover meal because it's the angel of death is going to pass over the Hebrews, and to take the blood and put it on the doorpost, and that will indicate that this is a Hebrew family, that these are the people of God, and not to cause the death. It's a common essence of sharing too, because Moses tells them if your neighbor does not have the money for a lamb, does not have the ability, then you share with them so that they too will be saved. So the better off will take care of those who don't have anything. Well, the angel of death does pass over, and the Hebrew people are saved. The Egyptians, their firstborn dies. It's not only the children, but it's also the cattle and the adults who were the firstborn in their families. And so this terrifies Pharaoh, and he decides that the only way to get rid of this plague is to get rid of the Hebrews. And so he says, go. Moses gets the people, and they get their neighbors who also don't want the plague to continue, to give them gold and silver and things to take with them. And they grab what they can get, and they head out into the wilderness. Now, Pharaoh has a change of heart. He begins to think of the economic impact, that losing hundreds of thousands of slaves to do the work would be a devastating impact on the well-being of Egypt. And so he sends his army after the Hebrew people. So the Hebrew people are terrified. And what God does is send them a pillar of clouds by night and a pillar of fire by night and pillar of smoke by day to lead them. And as the Hebrews are approached by the Egyptians, who have chariots and all the mechanisms of war that they don't have, the fire comes between them to keep the Egyptians at bay. And then Moses goes out, and God says, lift up the staff that you threw down that was a snake, the staff that will later on help save the Hebrews, but it will lift it up, and the sea will part, and the people will be able to walk across. And so they began to do this, and the Egyptian army discovers that's what they're doing, and they charge after them. The problem is that the Hebrew people walking don't have that much weight, and so they are able to walk on the wet ground. But when the chariots and the horses come on, they get bogged down, and then the water comes back together and drowns the Hebrew army, and then sets the people free. And so that's how they escape from Egypt. But they have a lot more work to do because they've got the wilderness in front of them and an unknown future. And so next time we'll discover what they do in the wilderness. I'll see you next time.